You know, certain events, no matter how long ago they happened, are forever with us. I think everyone in the room can think of memories, good and bad, that would fit into that description, something that happened to you that you simply, to the day you die, will never forget. I think that's true of a man from Texas. A number of years ago, a tornado swept through the outskirts of Dallas, and the local TV station was interviewing this man. And the man had been driving a pickup truck when all of a sudden a tornado came in his path, swept up and picked up his car right off the ground. And he describes all of a sudden realizing he's spinning in circles, he sees debris flying all over the place, and he realized to his horror that he's stuck in the whirlwind. He says, "I've felt nauseous and thought this is the end." But amazingly, miraculously, this whirlwind spit him out, if you will, and his car landed right on its wheels. And amazingly, he survived. The Old Testament book of 2 Kings, what Diane read a few moments ago, at the end of his life, the prophet Elijah, what it says is he was taken up into the whirlwind, into the heavens. In some ways, it's a dramatic, imaginative, fitting way to describe a person whose impact on the nation of Israel was really incredible. Because throughout his life, Elijah was this whirlwind of activity. He was a man of great courage. Throughout the Old Testament, whenever he appears, he's shown as a person who's really capable of dealing what's in front of him. Whatever is in front of him, he seems to be able to handle it. In biblical times, folks almost always traveled in groups. They would travel in groups because there were potential dangers kind of out there. Bandits, robbers, wild animals, you kind of name it. But Elijah was one who wasn't afraid to go out there by himself without the aid of other people. When others were petrified to speak out against the cruel, intimidating, powerful king named Ahab, who was the king of northern Israel at the time, it was Elijah and Elijah alone who had the courage to oppose the king and what he was doing. When the queen was leading people toward the false god of Baal, the false god of materialism, Elijah does this wonderful thing. He calls for a showdown. My God versus your god of Baal. And it's a wonderful, wonderful story that I wish I could have more time with, but it was awesome. Perhaps one of his greatest acts, though, is what we read about today. He knows the end of his life is coming near. And in the wilderness, he just seems to keep walking toward the unknown. Walking toward the unknown. He's not paralyzed. He just keeps proceeding forward in faith. And it says he's swept up into this whirlwind. Who knows whether it's literally, but it's a wonderful, wonderful story. Every day, what I want to say to you is we face the whirlwind of an unknown future. We don't always know what lies in front of us, but we certainly have choices in how you and I respond to what's going to be in front of us. We can face the unknown with fear and trepidation, and we know lots of people in this world, that's how they face every day, with fear and trepidation. Or we can face it with courage and hope and seek to instill that in other people. You know, the flu has been going around, and it's a horrible thing, but let me just twist it and say a positive thing about flu. You and I, we must realize that our witness can be like the flu. It can be contagious. And if we have a positive, hopeful witness, think about that catching on with the world around us. Courage is something we always have an option. As people of faith, courage is always an option for us. We clearly may not always know what the future holds, but you and I, as people of faith, we know that God is always out there in the future and always holds us in his hands. As Elijah the prophet walked out into the wilderness toward this whirlwind, we have to remember there was another person with him named Elisha. I wish he was named something else to make it a little easier. But Elisha was with the prophet. He's tagging along, he's walking by his side, and all of a sudden the prophet Elijah asks him, "What can I do for you before I'm taken away? What can I do for you?" And Elisha says, "Let me have a double dose of your spirit." In the Old Testament, when the Old Testament inheritance laws worked like this way, the oldest son in a family always got a double portion of the inheritance, or double the amount of goods. And what Elisha was really requesting was to be acknowledged by Elijah as his son, as his heir, not necessarily to inherit goods. What he was asking for was, can I have your power and your influence? Can I have the privilege of doing what you did in trying to bless others? In the end, that's kind of what happens. When Elijah was taken up into the whirlwind, it says he left behind his mantle, or the better way of saying it is, he left his influence all over Elisha. You know, it's a key fact of our life that every single one of us in this room and every single person in this world leaves some type of influence behind. You can't throw a stone in a pond without it creating ripples. Just the way we live our daily life, we cannot possibly go through this life without influencing other people, touching other people's lives in some way. And quite simply, our lives can heal or can hurt other people. Our lives can encourage other people, or we can be someone who discourages other people. Our lives can be a positive influence, or it can be something much less than that. We simply can't escape the fact that our lives will always have an influence on other people. The thing we must pay attention to is, what kind of influence or impression do we want to leave behind? And I think that's an important thing to ask every day when we rise is, by the way I live my life, what am I going to do? What kind of influence am I going to have today on the people around me? In the Bible, the whirlwind, and I had not paid much attention to this till this week. In the Bible, a whirlwind is often associated with the coming of God, with the arrival of God. Today's text is about God coming for Elijah. It's not to destroy him, get rid of him. It's not abandoning him or ever forgetting him. It's much like the message of Jesus at the Last Supper, when Jesus looked his disciples in the eye and said, "Behold, I go and prepare a place for you. And where I am, I will bring you there. I will have a place for you and will be with you." And what this is saying is, God had a lasting place for Elijah. And as I think about that story, it's a reminder that God has a place for you and I as well, and will bring us home someday. Final story, there was a theology professor who taught a class called The Reality of God. And in that class was a young man named Tommy. And Tommy was a loud atheist, loved to engage in conversation, but he was somewhat obnoxious in this class. But he was always ready. And at the end of the semester, Tommy, with great cynicism, turns in his final paper to the professor, says, "Professor, do you think I'll ever find God?" And the professor says, "No." And his jaw nearly dropped. And he starts to walk out of the room, and the professor stops him and says, "Tommy, I don't think you'll ever find God, but I'm 100% certain he's going to find you." And he walked out, didn't say anything more. Several years go by, and Tommy develops terminal cancer. And shortly before he died, he came to see his old professor one more time. And Tommy was really weak at that point, lost tons of weight, but there was something in his eye that the professor noticed. Tommy said to the professor, I came to see you because of that last thing you said to me. You said you were sure God would find me." And he said, when I learned I had cancer, I got serious about finding God. I got serious about that quest. I searched and searched, I shouted, I pleaded at the top of my lungs, but God never showed up. So he said, well, I decided I'd give the rest of my time to at least trying to do something productive. He said, I didn't want to leave this planet without telling certain people that I truly loved them. So he said, I started with the hardest person of all, my father, who I have been estranged from. He said he walked into his house. The old man was reading his paper, the literal paper, covered it, and completely obscuring his face. Says, Dad, I want to talk to you. And the guy never put the paper down. Said, what what do you want? He said, Dad, I just came to show up to tell you that I do love you. I love you dearly. And he kind of puts the paper down. It's very much like the story Jesus told about the father with two sons. The father leaps to his feet, stops the conversation. He has tears in his eyes, comes over and embraces his son, gives him a huge bear hug, and they just sit there for hours upon hours, talking, connecting, reconnecting, saying things they hadn't ever said before. And Tommy said to the professor, my only regret is I waited so darn long to do this. I waited so long to express my love. He says, here I am in the waning moments of my life. My time is coming to a close, and I'm just beginning to open up to the people I'm supposed to love. But I'm finding great wonder in that, is what he said. And then he looked at the professor in the eye and said, I've realized that God was there, that God actually had found me. You know, we face whirlwinds throughout our lives. Uncertainty is going to be in front of us almost every day of our life to the very, very end. But we have to remember God will never let us face it alone. God will never forsake any of us, abandon us. He will not leave us without support. I think what I would say is he has this knack for continually showing up and sweeping us up into his love. Thanks be to God. Amen.